Hi, and thank you for joining us for the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. That is Robert Hilliard. I am Whitney Wiley, and we are here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific, talking all things leadership. And this week, we are talking about intentionality. Are you intentional with your leadership? Are you an intentional leader? What that means, why it's important, and how you can be intentional in your leadership. So the bottom line is that we are all leaders in some capacity, right? Some of us have positions and titles, and others of us, we are leaders by virtue of the fact that people are following us, they are listening to us, they are looking at the examples that we set. And so the question is, are you intentional in what you're doing so that those that you're leading, whether you are doing it by virtue of your title or some other method, that you are getting the results that you want? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Robert, any opening thoughts on this?
Intention is one of those words that when of course it's been around and people have been saying it around me for ever, but it wasn't something that really got on my conscious awareness until I became a coach. And then I started hearing, what's your intention? And so I think it's really important for us to define what an intention is in the context of leadership. I think that's really important.
Okay, go for it.
Okay,
I'll let you lead that discussion.
Well, it's really about what you plan to do. That's your intention. It's not just about your attitude toward it, that goes into it, but it's really what you're planning to do. And as a leader, you need to have action plans. And we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of it in a little bit, but it's really about your actions and how you plan to execute them.
Exactly. I like to think of it as, and we talk about this a lot, having a vision for your leadership, who you want to be as a leader. And it starts there. And then it becomes about the actions that you take on purpose, deliberately, right? Intentionally, that lead you where you want to go. So being clear on what your goals are, being clear on what your purpose is as a leader. So and we'll talk about purpose in another episode. So this is part of the simple leadership method. Intentionality is part of it, as is purpose or purposefulness. And they're different. A lot of times people use them interchangeably, but the way we're using them is separate. So you have a purpose, what you do to get there, that you are consciously and aware of in terms of moving there, is what is the intentional part, right? Is the intentionality. And it's about being deliberate in your actions, and hopefully that your actions are aligned with your vision, right? That you've got visions, you've got values as a leader, and that the steps that you take, the actions that you're taking, are actually aligned with where it is you're going and where it is you want to go. So that's sort of the what. The next part is why. Why is this important? What say you, Robert? Why is it important to be intentional in your leadership?
When you're intentional in leadership, you know what you suspect the outcome will be. And so you can look for those things. And if it's not heading in the direction that you anticipated or want, you can make adjustments. It's also really key when you are articulating that to your team members, because when you have an intention and you're articulating that to your team members, it becomes something that they can follow. It's a North Star for them to follow. They understand what the end result's going to be, and they can be looking out for any deviation from that.
Yeah, one of the really important things about being a leader, an effective leader, is trust, right? Your leadership depends on relationships. Relationships depend on trust. If there's no trust, you can't have strong relationships. And if you don't have those relationships, leading people without relationship becomes a challenge, if possible at all. And so this concept of being clear about what you're doing, where you're going, so that other people, your team, the or people in your organization, the people on your team, so that they are connected to that and they can depend on you to actually do what you say you're going to do. And so if you say you're going to do something and you do something totally different, right? You take some actions in a different direction, whether that's intentional or not, you start to degrade the trust. And when you degrade the trust, you're going to have a difficult time leading people. People don't want to follow people that they don't trust.
Right. And we can certainly talk about the components of trust, but one of the things that I will say with intentionality is that one of the direct components of that, any action that you take should be ethical. And people will trust you if they know that the decisions that you make are ethical. It becomes a problem for people when you're the type of leader that likes to either skirt that line, straddle that little gray area, or when you're completely unethical. So minding and making sure that the actions that you take are ethical so that people can get behind you, people can rally behind your vision, and you're also using that opportunity. If you really want to make this powerful, use that opportunity to also connect any actions that you have to the values of other people. So if they know they're not just working for you or not just working for the organization, but they're working in congruence with their values, and they're also working for themselves as well.
Yeah, that makes such perfect sense. Well, at least to me. And so, an example that I have from my past, talking about this intentionality and tying it with ethics in particular. And I may have shared this story in the past. And so, if you've heard this, then great. If not, you can go back and look for an episode where I've
I'm
talked
sure
about
it's worth repeating.
I did, so I had this experience in my prior life. I was the attorney for the organization, the organization's counsel, and I was accused of appointing myself the moral authority, right? Ethical, putting myself in charge of ethics. And in reality, when the question was posed, it's like, who decided you were the moral authority of this organization? And the answer was you did, when you gave me the job, right? Because, and I take that very seriously, not just because I'm a lawyer, although that has something to do with it. But the other part is when you're not behaving ethically, other people are seeing that, right? Then they think, and particularly when you're in a leadership position, right, by title, even if not, when people see that, they think that means that they don't have to behave ethically either. And so, all of this ultimately gets tied back to self-awareness. And we talked about self-awareness last month. And self-awareness as a leader is about you being aware of who you are, how you show up, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and making sure that you are showing up the way that you want to. And a lot of times, you know, I think we talked about this when we talked about self-awareness last month, is that people tend to think they're more self-aware than the studies show that they actually are. And self-awareness is a skill. It's something that you can improve. It's something that you can work on. And it's the same way with your intentionality, right? You can decide that you're going to be more deliberate, more, you're going to actually think through what it is you want to do and then act in concert, in congruence with what it is you say you want to be and who you want to be and how you want to behave. And so that particular boss that I had would profess, I'm sure, that he was ethical, and that he was very intentional with his actions. But when you look at what he said as opposed to what he did, if he was intentional, then it didn't match. Right. And again, it's that mismatch, the incongruency that creates the problem with trust. And what we don't want is to create a situation where people have a reason not to trust us, have a reason not, because then they're not following. And the way we talk about leadership here isn't just about your power, right? Your legitimate authority over people, but that people would follow you willingly, voluntarily, that they would be on your team because you have articulated a vision that they want to get behind. It's those people that when we're looking for loyalty, when we're looking for people to go above and beyond, that's where that comes from, right? Not because they feel threatened, and if they don't, it's a problem. So be clear about who you are. Take the time to do honest reflection, staying clearly aware of who you are, what it is you're doing, so that you can continue to take the action steps that you need to take, taking advantage of those opportunities to improve that you want to take.
Yeah, I like that. I know we're not talking about being self-aware right now because we did that last time, but it goes hand in hand with being intentional. And I like to think of being self-aware, if I can just go back in time a little bit. It's when you're self-aware or finding out how where you stand on that continuum is like hearing your voice, your recorded voice for the first time, I should say. Remember your experience hearing your recorded voice for the first time? It's like you're like, oh, I sound like that. That's what it's like when you realize how other people see you.
Yes.
So most people think they're showing up in one way when they may be showing up completely different for others. So having that clear picture of how you show up for others is key. And then when we move into intention, it's really about having a plan. It starts with a plan.
Yes.
You can't have action without a plan. I mean, you can, but it starts with having a plan, and then making sure, like we said, making sure that plan takes into account your vision, making sure that, and you've articulated that vision. You articulated that vision, making sure you're taking into account the values of other people. Certainly, your plan should have that ethical component in it. And when we talk about trust is built through consistency.
Yes.
And when you have a plan and you articulate that plan and you are consistent in how you're executing that plan, you're doing two things. You're being intentional and you are generating more trust as you do that. People like predictability. Some people don't, they're like, well, I don't want to be too predictable. That's how you generate trust. That's how you put those deposits in that bank, that trust bank account, is by being predictable and consistent, and being intentional will allow you to do that.
That is so good. And, just that point needs to be driven home, right? Consistency. And because what we do consistently lets people know what they can depend on happening. And your point about you know, we all have a need for security, stability, to see other people that we can depend on, to know that we can depend on other people. And the more you can be consistent in your actions in alignment with your articulated values, right? So here's where organizations and leaders go wrong. And I'm not pulling out, going to highlight anyone in particular, but just sort of this point that when someone cannot depend on you because you're all over the place, like this month you're yelling at people and sometimes you're super nice to them, and or when you're correcting people, one month one time you're doing it in a way that sort of chastises, and another you're super they can't get a feel for where you're coming from, and it makes people uneasy, right? And when they're uneasy, they are not bringing their best selves to the table. And as a leader, you have to decide, right? You have to decide what it is you want, from your people, what it is you want from yourself. I would say being able to empower your team is important. But in the end, you have to decide whether or not that's important. And then, are you taking actions that lead to empowering them? If you say, I'm about empowering you, and lifting you up and helping you be the best employee, the best team member you can be, and then your actions are constantly tearing them down, or inconsistent with sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Now I don't know what to expect from you, and I'm on edge, which means I am not showing up as my best self. So you have to take some time to really sit and think about, what is it that I want? How do I want to lead? What are the characteristics, the traits that I want to exemplify for my team? What do I want to bring out of them? How do I want to help them learn and grow, right? There are hundreds of questions you could be asking yourself, or things that you could focus on. You don't have to focus on everything all at once. You can take a handful of traits or characteristics that you want to develop or strengthen, work on those, be consistent with those, and then you can add other things over time. But you have to decide, what does that look like? What does my leadership look like in terms of my communication, my interactions, the things that I'm doing to develop relationship with my team, so that they understand who I am, and the person that they understand who I am is in alignment with who I really am, right? Because if there's an incongruence there, you can't be consistent, right? Eventually, the truth will out. And so this goes into being authentic, being a good communicator, being someone who takes the time to develop the skills, communication skills, being disciplined. And I'm going to get into this, but I want to let you jump in here. Being clear about what you're doing that is that you can duplicate.
Yeah, that's a great point. And often when we talk about this and people think of being intentional, and the way we're describing it, we kind of heavily, well, I did kind of heavily leaned on actions when it comes to your leadership role. The actions that you're doing, it may be projects that you're doing with your team, it may be a new initiative that the organization is rolling out that your department, your area is responsible for. But you can be intentional with any aspect of leadership. You can create a plan for how you show up. You can create a plan for how you present your presentations. You can create a plan for how you want to communicate to your peers, how you want to communicate to your bosses, how you want to communicate to your direct reports. So really looking at, you can use this with any aspect of your leadership, which is why I love the simple method so much. It's got so much flexibility, and you can say, okay, well, I'm going to use this on these, focus on being the intentional, and I'm really going to look at how I can apply that to my public speaking. I have a presentation I need to do, or later on, you may say, well, I have some performance evaluations I need to do. So these are annual appraisals I need to do with my team. How am I going to be intentional about that? What aspects am I going to be intentional about the feedback that I give? Am I going to be intentional about my active listening, or the conversation in general? So there's so much flexibility there. And what I love about the work that you and I do, we try to narrow it down for the person so they're not overwhelmed, so they can pick and choose where they want to use the tool. And I think that's what's really important about this, and what's fascinating about it.
I love that. And it makes me think of, I'm training. I do, a trainer, and I train, I don't know, 3 or 4 different programs around leadership, women in leadership in particular. And one of the questions very early on that I ask in all of the classes is, what's their leadership philosophy, right? What's your vision? Do you have a vision? What's your philosophy? And what I find is that most don't have any. They haven't thought about it. And the whole point of us talking about this with you today, and basically really week after week, right, and reiterating these points, is that when you have a vision, when you have a philosophy, you have something to tie your actions back to, right? If you don't have that, then you're sort of being haphazard in how you go about your daily tasks, how you go about your interactions, your communications. Whereas if you have a vision, it becomes your North Star, right? It is the place that you're trying to go. You may not hit the mark every time. And when we're talking about consistency, that isn't to say that you have to get your end result, your desired result each and every time. But you can be consistent with the actions that you take. And whether or not you get where you're going is another issue, right? That's beside the point. The consistency is about what you put in. Your output may not always be exactly what you wanted. The output may not be as consistent as you like, but your input certainly can be. And it can and still be flexible around the things that you need. So having a vision is paramount, and then having a philosophy about how you want to lead, what your thoughts are. Is your thought that your job, right? So for some people, and I've had this said in my trainings, some will say that actually have a goal, a philosophy, a vision, that their goal is to put themselves out of a job, right? That they are training their people to be leaders themselves. Is that you?
Mm.
Could be. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Right? If it is, then the actions that you're taking in your interactions with your people will help them to see that. After you've articulated that that's where you're going, right? And you are identifying the people on your team, high potential, or those that you want to develop, to see how it turns out. And then you're taking actions that help to lead in that direction. Whatever your philosophy is, right? Whether it's about empowering, lifting up, preparing for the future, what have you, as opposed to maybe just getting the work done. And if I have to micromanage you and tell you what to do each and every day, right? Maybe that's your vision and your approach. Then you have to make sure that that works for the people on your team, which goes to sort of my next point, which is when you are intentional, it is about having clarity about what you want to achieve, but also what do the people that you are leading, what do they need from you? Right. So we talked about consistency and we talked about stability, but what do they need from you? How do they need you to show up, right? So that they can be the best that they can be. They can be all that they can be. That they can develop in their careers, right? So there are a number of things that you can focus on: your career, the career of your team, um, showing up in a way that establishes you in the way that you want to be seen, your brand, so to speak, with your peers and with those that you're leading. But having some understanding of what people need from you, right, so that you can deliver on that, becomes a part of your vision and how you want to move forward with it. And then having some clarity about what you're doing that works. Right. So you can take actions all day long. They could be deliberate, intentional actions. Are they getting you what you're trying to achieve? Not just getting the work done, but in general, are they getting you what you're trying to achieve? And so if developing the next generation of leaders is important to you, is the work getting done, and are these people developing, right? And what are you doing that is moving that needle so that you can duplicate what's working and eliminate those things that are not working?
Yeah, and you're hitting on something. You're saying it without saying it, and that's monitoring your progress. So many people, and I've worked for leaders like this. We're going to do X. Here's the end result. Here's when it's due. Go make it happen. And then they don't check back. There's no progress. There's no check-ins. And so people are working on it. They don't know how critical it is. I think we've been doing this podcast for a while, and I think I talked about a situation where years ago I did some training with my boss and on a reporting software, and we had just finished the training. And of course, because you're a trainer, and I lived as a trainer for many, many, many years, that when you go to training, that's just the start. You need to have many iterations of practice before you can master what you've been trained at. So we had training on it. And you know that within 3 days, 77% of what you learn is atrophied if you don't do it. So we had the training on Friday. Monday morning rolls around and he wanted me to generate a report. So obviously I have to use, all my notes and stuff to get it done. But he wasn't very clear in the deadline. He said, I need it by Monday. Okay, so Monday I come in, or whatever date he said. I come in, I start working on it. First thing when he comes in, he goes, do you have the report for me? I'm working on it. I told you I needed it today. Yeah, but today is all day. He wasn't very clear. You need to be very clear. And the bottom line is I got it to him in a reasonable time. I took very good notes, and I compared them to the cheat sheets that they gave in the course, and I was able to get it to him in like 20 minutes or something like that. He didn't even use it for the meeting that he wanted to report for. So that was another. So inconsistency, not clear directives, no intentionality there. Didn't have. I'll just tell him. Didn't monitor, check in. Hey, are you working on that? Do you know? It was just like, we went to training. I'm giving this to you, and you're going to make it happen. And I'm going to take it into his boss, and look what we've done. And that's not true leadership. Part of the issue, and I want to touch back on something you said about philosophy. Part of the issue, and the reason why many leaders don't have a philosophy, is because for many years in this country and around the world, you didn't need one.
Right.
All you needed was a title, and people were going to follow your lead and do what you told them, because you probably had the training and or education to have that title in an industrialized situation, and they did not. And not only that, you have the social aspect of it where, well, because you have the education, you were able to afford to go to the better schools than this person working for you. There's also the social aspect of that. So people were going to follow you. You said, do it. Things are different now. Many times the people that are on the team have more education than the people leading the team. So that complicates the issue. So there are some other dynamics at play here that we often forget.
So I would say, as we start to wrap this up, clarity of what it is you're doing, right? Clarity on your goals, clarity of your purpose. And the good news in this is that you get to decide that, right? You get to decide. Whether or not what you decide ultimately works is another story, right? But you get to decide what your vision is, what your philosophy is as it relates to who you are going to be and how you're going to go about leading. Whether or not you are bringing other people along for the ride, or it's going to be all about you, right? And then you'll see whether or not what you've decided is effective or not. Right? Does it get you what you want in the end? And again, I would challenge you to think of it as more than or beyond whether or not the work gets done. Because, at least in my experience, the work often gets done even when you don't have an effective leader, right? The work will get done because people are committed to doing their jobs. Most people are committed to doing their jobs and doing their jobs well. So you can't measure it by whether or not the work gets done. The measure has to be something else. So if it is about you not having to micromanage, right? That's if you feel like you have to micromanage, you need to take a step back. You need to do some introspection. You need to have some self-awareness. Do you have to micromanage, or are you micromanaging because that's who you are, right? And so having, again, this honest reflection, taking the time to think about who you are and how you are navigating, interacting with your people makes a difference, and looking at whether or not there are opportunities for you to improve, to piggyback on your strengths and get better in that. So if you are micromanaging, do you really have to, right? Or is that who you are? And if you have to, if you feel like I don't want to micromanage, but I have to in order to get the work done, then there are other questions that you have to start asking yourself that will allow you to move away from that. And goes back to your vision, your philosophy, right? The clarity. Are you communicating Are your actions in alignment with your words? Are you saying one thing and doing something else, right? Are you, not just for you, but for your people? Are you saying one thing and then rewarding a different behavior from them, right? If you are rewarding a behavior that you don't want to see in your people, you have to think about why that is. And so a lot of this is your self-work. This is you doing work, sometimes called deep work, right? You have to do the work to figure it out. And it's easier. And this is why people don't have a vision, they don't have a philosophy. It's just easier not to, right? It's easier to get the job, to show up and expect people to do things and get it done. But if you're looking for something beyond getting the work done, you've got to put in the work on the front end.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself.
So, any final thoughts, or was that your final thought?
Final thought is really know how you want to show up and have a plan for showing up, have a plan for how to show up in that way, and monitor to see if it's indeed unfolding the way you envisioned it. My final thoughts.
I love that. And then being flexible, right?
Mhm.
To make change, to pivot if necessary, and be okay with that is the other piece, is to be okay with that. And I the more you can do that, the more you're conscious and aware of what you're doing, how you're showing up, being willing to be flexible and make changes along the way, the more you'll see your vision and the your philosophy about leadership start to unfold actually in the way that you want and that works for you.
Very true.
Cool. So we want to thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. We are here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. If there's anything that we can do for you, all right, if we can help you in your leadership journey to help you develop into the leader that you want to be, help you put together your vision or philosophy on leadership, right? To look at what you're doing and how you can be more intentional and grow in that, please reach out to us and let us know. If you need a coach, Robert is an absolutely excellent leadership coach. I will put his email address up for you. You can reach out to Robert on that. I too am an excellent coach. He specializes in being an executive coach. I am more of a career management and transition coach, but you are welcome to reach out to me as well. Would love to help you in your continual development as a leader and how it moves you forward in your career progression. So, if you've got something that you'd like for us to cover on the show, a topic that you'd like for us to cover on the show, drop us a line and let us know. We would love to incorporate that into what we're doing. So just so you know, this year we're doing our schedule a little bit differently. On the first Thursdays of the month, we are talking about the simple leadership method and the component parts of that. On the second Thursdays of the month, we're talking about items that are in the news, leadership in the news. And so we'll be pulling things that are happening, things that we're observing, reading, seeing happening, and talking about the good, the bad, and the otherwise, right? And helping you to see what's happening around you, how you can use those as lessons for you to continue growing. And then on the third Thursdays, we are having a guest. That is our goal, to have a guest on each of the third Thursdays throughout the year. And then on the fourth Thursdays, we'll be having our book discussion for the book club. And so you look out for posts about the books that we're reading. If you are seeing this for the first time in February, as opposed to down the line on a replay, if you're seeing this for the first time this month in February, we are reading Leading with Soul by Bowl and
Deal.
Bowman and Deal.
Yeah.
So we invite you to read the book with us this month, and then join us on the fourth Thursday to discuss the book. So with that, again, thank you for joining us. And until next time, take care.
See you soon.